All right, so I don't see the number of participants increasing very dramatically, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'd like to thank first everybody on the call for taking time out of your busy schedule to join this webinar today. My name's Ian Ballantyne, and I'm with the demo engineering team here at NetBrain. So today's webinar is going to surround NetBrain's 11.1b next-gen release, and specifically how we can address security risks using real-time network security assessments. There will be two parts to the call today. First, I'll be highlighting an example of a security assessment dashboard, the components, why it's important, and how it can help you in the day-to-day regarding security. And the second part will be creating automation and adding that information to an existing dashboard. So I will detail how to put together a network intent or an automation and how we can execute that and fulfill a dashboard so you have real-time data to reference. So with that said, I think I'm going to just jump into the demo itself. We have half an hour, so I don't really want to waste much time on a few slides. So I'm just going to close this off here. Okay. So as part of the 11.1b release, NetBrain's new summary assessment dashboards provide you, the user, a simple yet detailed view of the network as it relates to elements of the infrastructure, things like configuration, performance, capacity, and today, which we are going to talk about, is the security side of things. So what we're looking at here, this is a security assessment dashboard. So these are continuous assessments associated with security, which are being tested against the network. So what we're looking at here across the top, this is a simple summary reference section. So what this is referencing is on this report or on this dashboard, there's a number of intents that are being executed. And so what we're looking at here is we're executing roughly 1,089 network intents for the duration of this dashboard. The number of devices involved on this dashboard is 68. The number of alerts that have been generated are 322. And the number of successes are 294. So the number of alerts are referenced by the color red, and the number of successes are referenced by the color green. What this is meaning is when these automations execute against the network for their specific use case, they're either going to have a comply, which would indicate a green highlight, or a red, which would indicate not compliance, or non-compliance rather. So as I go through these different dashboards, I'm going to highlight a little bit and discuss a little bit about what these mean and how we can drill into them to get some useful information. So this first part is a CVE vulnerability check. And in this specific check, we have an intent group called the Cisco Security Advisory. So we have a number of CVEs in here that we want to test against. Now, of course, if there's different vendors involved, they would have their own CVE reports. So if I wanted to build out an Arista CVE report, I have that option. So it comes down to what your vendor is and what you're looking for in terms of these specific advisory reports. So down the left side here, we have these, again, these are the network intents. So these are the automations that are running in the background, which are invisible to the administrator or the network engineer, right? And the idea is through continuous assessments, these dashboards are going to provide you with up-to-date real-time data as it relates to the security of the infrastructure. And so while these are CVE reports, we can even build them out to be compliant with NIST frameworks. So here we have a NIST framework, or NIST, and we can see that there's a whole pile of reds, and this is for the purpose of the demo, but you can see we have a number of checks that are continuously running against the network. So here we have an enabled telnet device, so we're going to be testing against telnet. We want to validate that there's no unused ports but they're not on shutdown. We want to ensure, a lot of these different aspects of some baseline precautions as it relates to security. I'm going to get into the automation component and the automation build in a few minutes. But the nice thing to keep in mind here is this dashboard will continuously update at the frequency that you wish. So if I have automations running in the background against the infrastructure continuously through the day, I can have these dashboards update in parallel with that, which means that when I look at these dashboards, they're going to be up to date because of the execution of those automations. Okay, so this is an example of a couple widgets. Now, these dashboards are adjustable, or a better term would be you can create them to how you wish, right? So this network assessment dashboard here is a daily network assessment, whereas this is specific for security. So you can build out these dashboards and tailor them to your specific requirements. So if you wanted to have, like, this is an example of a day-to-day daily network assessment. So again, it's automation that's continuously assessing the network, and within this dashboard, which could theoretically be sent to, a VP level, that sort of thing, just to see the health of the network. We can see here that if, part of it on this example is a security assessment dashboard as well. So we have the ability to, again, look at those specific checks, whether it's NIST requirements, firewall requirements, as long as we can get data back from the device through automation, which is achieved through 4 different methods, an SNMP OID parse. We can parse the running config, we can execute an API call, and we can execute CLI commands. So through those different methods, we're going to pull data back from the device, and we can test on security-based requirements against the infrastructure. And the execution results are what we drill into when we get into trying to figure out why something was non-compliant. So an example of that would be if I have a look at, let's see something down here. If I look at, this disabled core device, we can see that there's 37 intent results that have not passed based on what we see here. Okay, so if I wanted to look at something quite simple, enable HTTP device, NTP. So if I just wanted to click on one of these non-compliant checks, I can do that. And if I wanted to pull up a map in real time, I can do that as well. So when NetBrain does this, it's going to open up its own independent map on that specific execution. It's going to overlay the problem, or it's going to overlay the output on the specific test on the map for you, so you can actually click it and drill into why it failed. So what we have here is, this is the diagnosis details and compare screen. So what we're doing here is we can drill into a few checks on the issue itself. So this is related to NTP settings. So what we're doing here is the current configuration is not true. So what we're doing is we're testing against the current configuration and the variable NTP status. This is going to make more sense when I get into the build itself, but effectively what we're doing is we're defining what we want to test against, and effectively it's going to be a Boolean output logic with that. Okay, so I'm going to get into the intent in a few minutes, but the big takeaway here from these dashboards is that in the background, transparent to people within the organization or network engineers, we can have NetBrain perform those critical network security assessments day-to-day, continuous through automation, and that would run in the background and then feed these dashboards. So you have a very simple reference model to look at in terms of security and health against the network, right? So we have a lot of red, so this is obviously indicating we have some issues we need to look at. And drilling into each of these checks, we have the ability to be very particular about what we want to test against, right? Now, as part of this, right, you want to stand up some automations to test against different elements within the network. If I wanted to use the intent-based automation center, I actually have libraries that I can pull in for these assessments, right? So these libraries are pre-built automation units, and they can be downloaded as a library. So IBNA library 1.3, you can see that we have some fault tolerance checks. We've got some network, etc. And we have the same thing for security, right? So we have some pre-built automations that you can use, so you're not defining these by yourself. So that's going to speed up sort of the when you stand up these automations to test security against the network, you can use what's available out of the box on the template side. Okay, so I'm actually going to jump into one of these checks here. Let's see if I do this check enough. This is actually what I'm going to be demonstrating a bit later, but I'll show you on the map what we're going to do here. So conceptually, what you want to think about is that the automation in NetBrain can continuously assess in the background at a frequency that you define any element as it relates to security, because we have the ability to pull the data through different means, like I said, API, SNMP, et cetera, and we test against your use cases, your use case scenarios that you define in the automation. So this specific check I'll jump into the network intent here. There's a few things that are really helpful here. So if I use the dashboard as a starting point to help identify an issue in the network, typically when something changes, that's when you're going to be notified of an issue, right? If that's what you're looking for in the intent. Okay, so here we have a network intent. If I wanted to open it up and I wanted to edit it, okay, this is a pretty simple check. We're just doing a telnet check, and I'm going to run through this process with you in about 5 minutes or so. And so effectively what we're doing here is we're issuing a show command, we're parsing some data out, and then because we've captured that information in a variable, we have the ability to be very precise and very particular about the diagnostic tests that we want, so they can be, it's Boolean in nature, meaning when we define these checks, they can be for thresholds. So if I have a CPU threshold that I don't want to exceed past 80, I can define that. So the options here are limitless, and you can stand these up and you can have these continuously assess the network. So there's a lot of use cases for that. Compliance, config drift. There's all kinds of use cases as it relates to security when it comes to this this type of check. Okay. So these dashboards collect the automation results as it relates to security. So what I'm going to do is, excuse me, I'm going to create a real quick network automation. And I'm going to use this map here. So what we're looking at here is just a simple context map from a device. And so I pulled it up on the map and I saved it. And now I want to just define a quick network intent to do some testing against Telnet for this specific segment. Again, this is a very simple example. Like I said, as long as you can get, excuse me, as long as you can get the data back from the device, we can test against it. So some examples could be, we can validate things like what ACLs are being hit, all kinds of configurational checks, right? You can continuously assess these against the network, and these dashboards can provide you that output data. So what I'm going to do here is I've added a device on the map. I'm going to issue something that I have saved here. So just a show run pipe, I'm going to pull out the virtual terminal lines. So I'm just going to simply put that in there. I'm going to hit retrieve. So NetBrain is communicating with those specific devices. And specifically, US Boss R1 is what we're going to be using as what we call the seed intent. That's going to provide the direction and the deployment for the automation. So I'm going to create a new parser for this. So just do this. And from here, the variable that I want to test against is all. I want to ensure that Telnet is not active on any devices within the segment. So all I have to do is double click that word. I'm not going to put much in for a name. So typically you would put a name up here to allocate or associate what this is with what you're testing against. So something like Telnet check could be used there. I'm just going to hit apply here. I'm going to hit OK. And so we parse that one variable. I'm going to add this to the network intent, which is what we call the automation. So I can do that. I'll just do a diagnosis one. I'll call this just a quick telnet check. Okay, and then the variable in question that we're using, so I'll set the anchor to input. The variable that we're using is input. I want to ensure that the input section does not contain, or so I'll use contains telnet. Okay, same thing here. We're going to do contains all, and we're going to make this an OR because it's an OR Boolean expression. And then does not contain SSH. Okay, so when we stand up these automations, really all it is Boolean logic. We're getting data back from the device, we're testing against this Boolean logic. So effectively what you're going to get as a response is a 1 or a 0. Okay, so what I'm going to put here is a diagnostic message. So if this checks out, then Telnet is active. Please disable. Okay, and we can set that as the status message. And then we're going to have an else here because there will be an additional condition. So we're going to do an else, and we're going to set this as telnet is disabled. Okay, I'm going to hit. Okay, so now that we've defined the the telnet check itself, what I want to do is I don't want just US boss R1 to go through this. I want this to be executed across the infrastructure. So NetBrain automation in NetBrain is scalable, meaning it doesn't have to necessarily be it doesn't have to execute against a single device. We can do it at scale and at simultaneously. So what I'd like to do is to push this out to the other compatible devices in the segment. So all I have to do is click duplicate to other devices. I'm going to hit OK. And now what NetBrain has done, it's created its own sort of scripting plan to deploy this out to the devices in the segment. It's going to validate what I've defined in here, and it's going to provide that output that I need to ensure that telnet's not active. So I'm going to hit create here, and I'm going to run it against the segment. Okay. And once we look at this, we see a pink overlay. That pink overlay is indicating that telnet is active on these devices, and that's not what we want, right? So let's say I wanted to continuously monitor this, right? And whether this is, this is a very simple test against telnet, but, if I wanted to test config drift against my firewalls, if I wanted to validate compliance, however that looks, as long as I can get that data back from the device, I can test against anything. And having this continuous assessment run and feeding these dashboards is a fantastic method of ensuring that your infrastructure is tight and the configuration is good. So we can see here that none of this is compliant. So what I'd actually like to do is I'm going to save this map. And I'm going to move this over to the map intent, which effectively means I want to dedicate this map to the intent. But first, I'm going to save to my private folder. Okay, now I can move over to the map intent. And actually, what I want to do now is run this on a schedule. So I'm going to set this up. So telnet check. Okay, we're going to be using the network intent that I defined or developed here. And I want to continuously run this. And I'm going to run this every 1 minute for 10 minutes. And we're going to execute this now. Oh, I have to give it a different name. Okay, we've scheduled that intent. And now what I want to do is append that network intent to a dashboard. Okay, so I'm just going to do this, telnet check dashboard. We have the network intent specified. I'm going to do it for today. I'm going to hit create. Okay, I'm just going to rename this. Okay, so I'm going to open the intent dashboard. Now we might not see execution results yet, but we should, as it was set to a minute. If we don't, I can refresh it and we'll see some data in a second or so. But what's nice here is that you could, these automations can be ran at a frequency that you define. The results, again, are caught in these dashboards, are captured in these dashboards. And what's nice about it is it's going to give you that information that you need continuously against the network, right? So how that looks for you, if there's a non-compliant automation that's executed towards security, you can have a ticket raised. There's all kinds of options. So there's, it's really important that we can capture that information in these dashboards. I might have to check the run settings there. Okay, so while that's running, I'm gonna, I guess, this portion of the demo is me just sort of adding it to the other dashboard. So that's sort of the conclusion. So I was trying to aim for about 11:25, which is in a few minutes. I'll actually open up the floor now for questions while that's running, because that will populate the dashboard once it's complete there. So I'll actually start fielding questions. Okay, so let me have a look here. Okay, so if you have any questions, go ahead and shoot it in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll answer it best I can. Hey, Benjamin. Okay, so let me pull that up for you. 1 second. So the pre-built intents are under the intent-based automation center. Okay, and under NetBrain download, you're going to have a few libraries available. So you can pick which one you wish. They have different elements. So we've got an on-demand assessment library, network essentials. These are auto installed, but yeah, for what you're looking for, the intent-based automation center, that's where the pre-built intents are. And these are, once they're installed, they're listed under the installed template section. And you can see we have quite a bit available here once you install those libraries. No problem, Benjamin. How long are any outputs saved later investigation? So Jorn, all of your outputs, if we go back to the dashboard, we can look back in the history and the execution time. So each individual execution of those outputs are saved. And so let's say, for example, I wanted to look at a specific network intent. If this dashboard should be working at this point, I'm not sure what's happening there. You know, we have independent dashboards. So for example, if I wanted to look at this Cisco advisory group, I can just pull up this specific dashboard. And this is going to be specific for that execution for those CVEs, right? And what I can do is I can look specifically at the intents with alerts. Now, again, this is specific for that automation, whereas these dashboards are collecting all of the independent executions, right? So this is the Cisco Security Advisory. This is the intent group. And this CVE consists of 5 different, or this advisory group consists of 5 different CVEs. So these are all network intents. This row is a network intent, and that's executing, and that's applicable for different regions. So we have EMEA listed here, Singapore, US East. So what you can do is these dashboards can represent your global infrastructure geographically. So you can have different locations, and the results of each location, again, is highlighted here, right? So if I wanted to look at EMEA and I wanted to look specifically at the CVE report, I could click on it and I can view the map. And so while this dashboard is independent for the Cisco advisory check, the summary dashboard is what collects all of those multiple advisory checks. So Jorn, what you can do is you can investigate on the independent dashboard the results of that specific network intent and the trending associated with it, what time it failed, what time it was successful. So all of those options are there for you. Right, so this is an example of that dashboard where you'd be able to see the trending. So if I pull up the intents without alerts, I can see the date and the time that it was executed. I do actually have a better map that has a trending line that can show you some of those automations. No problem, Jordan. Tom is asking for the CVE, how do you know if that apply to what type of devices? So Tom, when you're defining the automation, again, the automation is what's feeding these dashboards, right? So the automation is in the background. It's continuously assessing the network, and it's continuously validating what's defined in those network intents. The qualification for those devices is what defines how they're identified in the network intent. And I don't want to get too much into the configuration side of things, but you have the ability to auto define or auto associate a device or a type of device to the network intent out of some pre-qualification checks. Something could be like, does it run Cisco iOS? Does it have any specific checks for that? I thought you download all the CVE and find devices that are affected. So as for the automation is what's going to need to be able to qualify for that check. So the first step towards identifying that a CVE is applicable for a device is, the vendor that you're using. And so part of that library can include some of these CVE checks, but for the qualification process for the actual check itself requires some investigation. So if I'm talking to a Cisco firewall, for example, there will be a qualification check for that. And those pre-built automations do include a lot of those qualification processes, so that if you do download a CVE template, it's going to have some pre-qualification devices in there or vendors, that sort of thing. You're welcome, Tom. All right, so that was a very quick overview of the automation, how it feeds into the dashboards that are continuously collecting that information. So it gives you a very simple live holistic view of the security of the network by looking specifically at a dashboard surrounding network security. So we talked about the CVE reports that could be applicable here. We talked about the NIST compliance. You could potentially have another widget that is specific around the infrastructure design. So things like ACL configuration, what have you. It really comes down to what your use cases are for your environment. There's a ton of flexibility and a ton of power in the automation into the dashboard conceptual flow here. With that, that's sort of the end of my demo. I wanted to thank everybody for joining. Emma, I'm going to kick it back to you, and thank you everybody for the opportunity to demonstrate this aspect of security that we can address.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian. Thanks everyone for hopping on today. Don't forget we have another webinar next Thursday. I did drop that link in the chat. It is automate our network troubleshooting through no code automation. So please click that link. Join us next Thursday for another great webinar, and another thank you to Ian for a great demo.
Thanks, Emma.
Have a
Bye,
good one.
everybody. Have a good
Bye.
one.